Everyone, welcome. Happy Thursday. My name is Jan Mercer-Doms. I'm the Vice President of U.S. Development with Mayshad Choice. We're thrilled to be presenting our Money and Women series today, and our topic today is the innovation of Fintech post-COVID-19. I'm here today with our founder and CEO, Neza Alawi. Welcome, Neza.
Thank you, Jan. I'm Neza Alawi, founder and CEO of Mayshad Choice, the company that empowers women on a daily basis. We create content, conversations, workshops to support women in their personal and career development. And we're here today for an exciting conversation.
Thanks, Neza. Hi, everyone. Make sure to follow us at joinmayshad.com. That's joinmayshad, MAYSHAD.com. And please, during the course of conversation, if you like what you're hearing, let us know. And please feel free to type your questions and thoughts, and we will address them in our Q&A session at the end of the session. I'm so thrilled and honored that Scarlett Sieber is with us here today. Scarlett is a rock star in all things related to women in fintech. She is one of the industry's most recognized and sought after speakers as a thought leader and innovator. She's one of the top innovators in banking and finance technology today. She has been invited to speak at over 100 prestigious financial services and technology conferences around the globe, including Money 2020, the Financial Brand Forum, CIO Edge, Seamless Middle East, South Summit, and many, many, many more. And this is what I love about Scarlett, as she's always in one of the top 20, 50, 100 lists. She's been named 100 most influential blockchain women. She's been named top 20 women in finance. And I could go on, but then we wouldn't have enough time to actually ask Scarlett a single question. She's held SVP roles at BBFA, USAA, and her current work is Managing Director and Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer at the banking and fintech consultancy firm CCG Catalyst, includes advising banks on their digital and innovation strategies. Welcome, Scarlett.
Thank you, Jan. So happy to be here and be reconnecting with you again.
Yes.
But it works. It's all the same.
One of the beauties of networking, and now we're all networking in the digital world, so it's great to see you in your natural environment as we're all learning all things related to Zoom on our end.
Absolutely. I can't hug you, I can see you.
Scarlett, you have such an interesting background as a co-founder of a data visualization startup, and we do want to know what that means too. With us today, we have female founders, we have corporate executives, we have business owners, we have women that are pivoting and reinventing in their careers. So we're not all techies ourselves. So this conversation will be really interesting as we move forward in the new digital world and we create what comes next, to learn more about, Scarlett, what you're doing in this space to help stay revolutionary in all things related to fintech. So, interesting that, some of your clients include the London Olympics, the Super Bowl, NFL Films, The Economist, Forbes, WeWork, The Guardian. You've been the senior editor at Money 2020. And this is really interesting, senior advisor at NASA's Cross Country Innovation Summit, which I think is very cool. What originally inspired you in your career path, and what's led you to where you are today? And what have you learned over the course of your tenure of your career so far?
So many questions there, and so hard to articulate in a condensed form. I would say, if we start back with Infamous, the data visualization company you mentioned, really what data visualization means is taking complex and enormously large amounts of data and finding a way to showcase that and present that in a digestible, comfortable format. So we ended up doing that through interactive word clouds. So we would go, and you mentioned some of the clients on that side being the Olympics and the Super Bowl and the Economist, where we would be taking millions and millions of tweets and showcasing key themes that were happening. You could look at what was happening at the track and field area. You could dive in on Usain Bolt and see everything that people were talking about with Usain Bolt, and positives and negative adjectives that were used to describe him. The same could be applied to news and many other things. And I think it's interesting when you mentioned the kind of tech mindset versus the business mindset with these female entrepreneurs. And I certainly did not see myself as a techie going into that. I had always been more of a business person. I went to business school, and that was my major. And I realized how passionate and excited I was about technology. So I still don't fully think that I am a technologist by any means, but I do like to merge those gaps. And I think looking at anything with a business and technology mindset is the healthiest way to do that. And I certainly try in my career and all throughout my career to find ways to take those two somewhat siloed parts of an organization, whether it be big or small, and find ways to bridge that gap. My career path has been a bit unique. It certainly was not fully intentional. At a very young age, the very first resume I made, I was back when I was living in Colorado, and neither of my parents went to college, and so I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I did have big ambitions to go to the big city, as in New York. And so my first objective ever on my resume was to be CEO of a major corporation in New York City. And I think I was 13 when I wrote that. So, nothing crazy at all. Certainly was not ambitious then either. But that's kind of been my guiding light. I knew I wanted to have an impact. I knew I wanted to do things that I was super passionate about. That led me to my startup, and that was an incredible experience. You listed some of those clients, and that was a lot of learning. There was a lot of highs and a lot of lows. That was a roller coaster, as the entrepreneurial journey is for many of us. And I kind of stumbled into banking. I certainly did not have a direct desire to go there. I, like many others and people who are now dealing with this today in 2020 with the current pandemic, I graduated around the time of the last recession. And that was definitely more focused on the financial collapse. And so I certainly had the perception that many others like me did at that time of, I'm staying away from the banks are bad. The reason why we're in this mess is because of the banks. And one of the banks you had mentioned, BBVA, they're actually a Spanish bank, but they certainly have a U.S. presence. They had reached out to my startup and really liked my technology. Long story short, they asked us to apply for a competition. We became a finalist. I met them down in Mexico. And fast forward, when the startup had some highs and lows and really kind of flatlined after a while, and I knew I wanted to do something different, I was looking at Google, I was looking at Palantir, I was looking at joining another later stage startup. And they reached out to me and we had a conversation. They said, we would really love to have you. We have the perfect job for you. And I was like, coming to work for a bank? There's no way I'm doing that. I spent a little bit of time doing some further due diligence on them. And they had talked about BBVA being a technology company before the big banks in the United States had done that. The CEO at the time was actually an old school IBM engineer and entrepreneur. And I just really felt connected to the vision and the mission. And that was my step into banking.
That's incredible, Scarlett. You have such a really interesting sense of a really interesting blend and a sensibility of both being simultaneously left brain and right brain, in the sense of the vision to be entrepreneurial and to be innovative. And thank you for sharing your background with us.
No problem.
So it seems like from a data visualization perspective, much of that's about storytelling, right? And being able to make sense of big data. And I think it's really interesting right now in this moment in time, like really truly, what does that mean in the sense of how we're making sense of everything that's happening now too, right?
Yeah, and for us, one of the things that is the double-edged sword of entrepreneurship is you could have the best idea or the best technology, and it could be the wrong timing or the wrong location even. You could be in the middle of nowhere and not get that funding you need to get to the next step, but you're solving a really big problem. And for us, we were really looking at, anyone who goes to the internet is being inundated with the amount of information. So how do we simplify that process? How do we make it easier to digest large amounts of content in a way that is comfortable and actually exciting? So on the publisher side, we talked about The Economist and Entertainment Weekly and a few others. But it was the publishing world is going through a major shift as well, where people are generally not necessarily going to X publication every day for their news, but they're going to Jan's LinkedIn and my Facebook and whatever else, and taking bits and pieces and coming and going. So we were trying to solve the problem of really focusing on how you interact with content when you get online. But then for the publishers, how do you keep people engaged on your site longer? And you spend all this money, especially for the big news publications, on these incredible journalists, and they're spending all this time, but the shelf life is actually quite short. So how do you extend that shelf life and make sure that the content that people are looking at is relevant to them? And that's still definitely true today. And there's just so much, and now you get into the issues of what's real and what's not, and are there biases involved? Because if you click on this article, then they think that that's your perception, and so everything is now going to be biased in that way. So there's a lot to work out on the data side still, for sure.
Thank you, Scarlett.
Scarlett, you're talking about BBVA as a Spanish bank, and it's funny because I spent the first 3 years of my college life in Spain, and it was the first bank where I opened my own account, and it's true that in 2000 they were already very tech savvy. So Scarlett, back to topics that are less fun. Today we learned that 33 million Americans are unemployed as of last week. How has your industry been impacted from an employment perspective? I would assume that there is a demand for growth in hiring and capital raising, but we know that companies like Lending Club laid off 1/3 of its workforce. What is really happening?
Yeah, the industry of financial services encompasses so much, so it's hard to kind of put a broad bucket or umbrella over all that we do. There are pockets all throughout. So some of the large vendors are certainly seeing a reduction of workforce. You mentioned Lending Club. So the lending world in specific is one that I believe will be, of all of the verticals within financial services, is going to be hit the hardest, depending on if we're talking about for small businesses or for consumers. But in general, lending as we know it is shifting, and the models that were once around and all the capital that was in financial services, I think will change and shrink to a degree. A little bit from the venture side, Fintech was kind of like the wild, wild west. And so for me, I think it's coming back to earth in some ways, where there was a plethora of money that was going into the space. And there were a lot of companies who had these, in my opinion, exorbitant valuations and hadn't really proved out the ROI in a way that, from my business mindset, now I felt comfortable in supporting. I mean, they certainly had hyper growth and a lot of users, but in terms of the active users and actually making money off of those users, they weren't necessarily supported. So I actually believe from the funding perspective, there will be a shift. It will be condensed, and that's actually going to be a nice level set. I think there are other aspects within financial services that this is going to pose a ton of opportunities for, though. I certainly have seen, and these are some smaller scale. So we tend to think of all these big companies with multi-$100 million valuations or billion-dollar valuations, but then there's the rest of the sphere where a lot of the activity is. And I feel encouraged still when I go on my social channels and have these conversations with my friends to see that there are still some $3 to $5 to $10 million raises that are happening actively. Those conversations probably started, and I would say they COVID, but they were able to still execute and close during this pandemic, which is certainly encouraging to me. Those tend to focus a bit more on infrastructure, which I think will be a huge deal. The banks, they're figuring it out. I mean, I know we could talk a little bit later about what's happening with PPP. And so they're trying to figure it out. They're trying to figure out how to motivate their staff. They're trying to figure out how to connect more in interesting ways with their clients, both on the consumer side and small business side. And technology is fundamental in that process.
No, for sure. I mean, fintech companies have a big role in the future of commercial banking. How are they creating that bridge right now during COVID-19? Are banks immediately reaching out to find those solutions for consumers, or they have been in shock themselves and it's something that will be more of like a midterm to long-term approach?
There's a lot of every institution is slightly different. So we have about 5,000 financial institutions here in the United States, which is a lot compared to most countries, which is encouraging and it's great in many ways, but that means there's a lot of different aspects that are coming through this. So if you think about just the impact of PPP and what's happening there hasn't been a lot of oversight from the government on exactly how these things are happening. And I actually have an incredible woman in bankers group that I'm closely involved with. So I get to see the daily interactions and questions, and there's a lot. How do we do X? How do we deal with this aspect? How do we deal with that aspect? And so a lot of it is very logistical in nature and aspects of that loan. But then what's encouraging to me is one of the big things that comes out of this is the chats around culture. How do we keep people motivated? How do we keep them excited? How do we make sure that our customers know that we're here for them? And for me, and this is going to be a very slight tangent, but one that I think is relevant, of those 5,000 financial institutions, many Americans, whether you be on the small business side or on the consumer side, you probably know of 10, maybe 20 of them. And those are the ones that dominate all of the news. You got the Chases, the Bank of Americas, the Citis of the world, the Wells Fargos. Well, really, that bottom 3,000 or so are, in my opinion, the lifeblood of what it means to be America and Americans. And they're the ones who are really supporting small businesses. And you're seeing that now. So one of the things we keep talking about technology and how Fintech can impact and help with COVID, and I'll give you some examples of how that's happening. But what is very interesting to me is we're now going back and shifting in a way to relationships. So I've had many conversations with entrepreneurs of all shapes, sizes, and stages, and especially women entrepreneurs who have found that going with one of the big 5 or the big 10 and trying to apply for this PPP loan has been a cumbersome process, to say the least. And it's not that it's going to be, smooth sailing with the small institutions, but when you actually have that direct relationship, that community aspect with our community banks and people of the likes, that is where the real value has derived. And I've seen people now shift their primary relationship from one of the big 10 banks over to the smaller institutions, the community banks, the regional banks, which I just love that relationship aspect is coming back because it's more important than ever. So I would say to the second part of your question, how banks and credit unions are implementing Fintech, it's probably a bit more of a medium to long term. I think they're certainly starting to explore it. The reality is digital is now. There has been a significant chunk of these institutions who has been aware of what's happening. They know that there's this digital transformation happening. They've been hearing about Fintech, but they haven't taken the leap to go and do it themselves. And I think this has given them that necessary push from the back end. You have the carrot and the stick, but here someone is coming from behind and saying, you've got to get going here, because business as we know it, banking as we know it is going to change fundamentally forever. And there was also a lot that was happening from a demographic perspective, where we look at different ages. Younger people tended to gravitate more towards digital solutions and online solutions. Well, now the boomers, and boomers is a very broad category that encompasses a lot of different groups. But if we think of the ones who were used to going to the branch every day or every week to spend time with their banker, they've now had to shift and get comfortable doing that on mobile. So that is a huge opportunity for these financial service providers to really expand, enhance, and build on that digital capability. Unfortunately, banking is a very complex system, so this is not going to happen overnight. But I do believe, medium to long term, to your question, that there will be huge transactional changes all throughout banking, really moving towards digital. And some ways that you're seeing that right now is some of these banks who aren't able to do the loans themselves actually have partnered with fintechs. So you've seen fintechs becoming lenders for this PPP process. Companies like Fundera and Cabbage are certainly some of the ones that are doing that. And really, payments is another area within financial services that is hit really mainstream right now, because it's changing how we purchase things. Instead of using our credit card when we go down to the store, we were talking, I'm here in New York, just the idea of taking my credit card out in a public place and it having it be touched by all these people and in the same machine as people, I'm going to go ahead and use Apple Pay, where I wasn't a big Apple Pay user before, because I just put my phone and it goes right back in my pocket. I'm not physically inserting anything anywhere. So there's a lot of opportunities.
I think, Scarlett, with a lot of opportunities, there's also comes a lot of opportunities, not just for the technologies themselves, but for training. To your point around different demographics and different generations, learning how to embrace online banking in different ways, right? And becoming more comfortable with things like Apple Pay, for example. I want to go back to one of the things you were mentioning earlier about how in the early days, not too long ago, but in the early days, fintech was kind of the Wild West. And wasn't it also kind of the Wild West from a compliance and regulatory perspective as well, where it took the government a while to kind of catch up to understanding how much innovation was really truly happening in this space? And in a way, we see the federal and state and local governments to some extent also breaking down during this period of time of COVID-19, just in the sense of trying to transfer monies and funds and capital into the hands of small businesses and individuals who are unemployed, for example. What is that relationship from your perspective, and what can we learn about the past to help guide now where we are today?
Yeah, you really touched on a very, very important aspect of this ecosystem that is financial services, which is the Fed and the regulators. You're 100% right in that the Wild West component it was certainly there, and we've seen some of these fintechs. The things that fintechs do really well is they're nimble, they're agile, they have the ability to test, learn, iterate quickly. They have some brilliant minds who are coming and thinking about problems in ways that the larger institutions necessarily haven't, because you get not just true for financial services, this is true across large companies, you get very comfortable and in the environment that and all of the reasons why things won't work. And then you have people who are coming in with fresh minds and perspectives who are saying, but let me figure out a way how. And we've seen some really successful examples of that. The challenge there has been they do not have that typically, and this has changed over time, that regulatory framework, compliance, BSA background. So there's a lot of things that were going on. One big thing that happened in the last 18 months, one of these robo-advisors decided to say that they were offering banking services. Well, it wasn't actually banking services, and for the typical end user, you don't really know the difference, but it's actually extremely important that they really weren't. It wasn't FDIC insured, so that it wasn't actually real banking services. And so you're seeing examples of that. The role of the government and the regulators is extremely crucial, and it's not surprising that you have seen titles like Chief Innovation Officer in places like the OCC. The FDIC has been looking for their CIO for some times now. I certainly am encouraged, and by the way, the chairman of the FDIC is a woman by the name of Yana McWilliams, who is a rock star. This is certainly my personal opinion, but I think she's just fantastic. You mentioned my role with Money 2020. I had her on stage talking about what's happening within financial services, and she's looking to shake things up. She does come from a banking background, but she certainly is looking to find ways to connect fintech and banks in an accelerated way that hasn't happened before. Government is slow, it takes time, we all know that, but I was so encouraged, and she's just one example, but to sit there and have these conversations with regulators who really are open to this and kind of forthcoming of, hey, we know that we're a bit behind and we want to be part of that conversation. My hope is just that accelerates at a pace that it hasn't been historically. So whatever we can do to move that forward, I think will be huge.
You mentioned the concept of robo-advisor, and for those of us in the audience who don't know what that is, would you explain to us what that means for just average everyday end consumers like us, and what do we need to know right now in the sense of how to protect ourselves? Because I think there's a lot of opportunity that's being generated and created out there right now, and those of us who aren't in the industry, don't always know what are the best ways to kind of source all of that and do our own due diligence at home.
Yeah, so to put it very simply, robo-advisors, so wealth management, and this is some interesting things too, back to, the fact of women and women in finance, is that women actually hold most of the wealth in the United States. And so pretty much historically, from a wealth management perspective, you would have that traditional relationship with your wealth manager, your advisor. There's complex structures on how that would work, but they tended to cater towards people with a lot of money. So when you have a high net worth, you're going to be targeted by, you put an X amount of money in your bank, and all of a sudden that bank is going to reach out to you and say, hey, have you checked out this aspect of what we have? So for everyone else, there was really not many solutions. So the idea of a robo-advisor at a high level is, automating that system and allowing people to start investing with a minimum amount of money, and that can be as little as $5. And so it really has started to have a serious impact and disintermediated the banks who have looked at, these small accounts, and each one has their own idea of what that is, and kind of dismiss them, where these robo-advisors are seeing huge opportunities for to take a piece of that pie and to get people excited about investing. Even if you have $100, here's what that can look like. There's so many ways to do that, and there's so many different types of robo-advisors. That could be a whole other conversation, but you can take power over your wealth, even if it's $50, even if it's $100. Just get started and see, if you do this is what happens over time. So there's certainly some pretty cool applications there, and there's definitely ones that are focused specifically on women. Probably the most famous of which is Sally Krawcheck's startup Ellevest, who looks at the investing from a woman's perspective. And there's many others that have done that well. Goldbean and a lot. So we can talk about that more, and I'm certainly happy to share some examples, because it's an exciting space.
Scarlett, it takes us to our next question, which is also a big question from the audience, is how can we get more capital to female entrepreneurs, and who will lead the way in moving the needle forward, and what will it take?
Such a hard question, and one that keeps me up at night, and has for a very long time. I would say the simplest answer and shortest answer to that question is, who will it take? It will take men. I've written in a few different capacities on this topic, not necessarily directly about getting capital, but about mentorship, but about growth and breaking the glass ceiling and all these aspects. And I truly believe men are half the population or more. I don't know the exact number, but they certainly represent a big proportion. And when you look at the control over traditional money, meaning VC money or power positions in big corporations, men certainly are dominant there. So it's making sure that they are very active in the conversation. I think there's two sides of this story, which on the one side, it's how we as women go in and present to these venture capitalists. I can speak for myself, and then for many friends who I've had these conversations with. We want to make sure that we are as direct and transparent and optimistic, but definitely realistic as possible. So when we talk about our projections, they tend to be a little bit less exciting than the guys who will go on and spout stuff that's really BS at the end of the day. And by the way, when you're projecting 10 years out, it's all, you can do your best calculations and have your best models, but a lot of it is kind of, okay, how's the wind going today? So it's telling your story in that compelling way. I think the biggest gap is early on in the process, and that's where we as women are having more challenges. Once you get past Series B, Series C, the numbers speak for themselves, and then a lot of the things that happen early on kind of go away, because it's a lot easier to start getting capital at that point, because your business model and your revenue shows everything that you need. It's hard early on, because the earlier you get, the less it is about your business and the more it is about you. And then it becomes a gut feeling of, this is like a marriage, this is like a relationship where I'm investing as you as a person. And that's where a lot of the biases come in. In fact, I was just reading an article about a Fintech female founder who did close her $3 million raise recently, and she talked about all of the biases that she was still facing, and she brought in a male colleague to go to all of the interviews with her for funding, and the questions were fundamentally different that they were asking her versus him. And even when they were doing due diligence before they ended up investing in her, they asked about her ability as a leader, and for him it was more of, where does he see his vision? And so there needs to be continuous education on the part of the funders, because we've talked, there are some things that we can certainly do to help enhance that presentation from the female entrepreneurs, but that's only half of the equation. The other half is on where the money comes from. And so there needs to be continuous scrutiny, and it doesn't have to be negative, but light shed on that side of the world to say, you're fundamentally asking different questions. And so you might not even realize there might be an unconscious bias here, that you're asking things differently because she's a woman versus a man, and making sure and just proving time and time again of examples of amazing women doing big things and having big successes. And there are plenty of those to go around.
I agree, Scarlett. I think there is definitely an unconscious bias linked to the fact that women, when they have presented their projects, were more careful about the social impact of it, but also the vision, the passion behind it, but less pragmatic in terms of numbers, or sometimes less ambitious in terms of numbers, resulting from a lack of confidence, and that realism that becomes a little bit more linked to the fact that I don't believe that I can run a multi-billion-dollar company. So definitely training, and I think the role of accelerators and incubators could be the solution to having more women accessing fundings. I remember, Jan, you having a conversation with someone from a VC about 9 months ago who told you, well, for us, we're just seeing numbers. We're not, we don't see the difference between a man and a woman, but it's all this unconscious bias that also makes it that the women will be less confident when pitching, when raising funds. So what do you think, Scarlett, about the role of accelerators and incubator moving forward?
Yeah, so let me just put one more thought on the funding thing, and then I'll move to that. I think one of the things too that I've heard a bit of is, so there are definitely more funds focusing on women, for women, by women, which is fantastic, and I love that. The part that still frustrates me being in the space is, and I'm happy they're getting the press, but there'll be all of this press around a $10 million fund or $5 million fund that's by women, for women. And that's great, but it's like $5 million, if we go back to just the simple statistics and economics of it, is not going to move the needle at the scale that we need. Whereas there's how many 5, 10, 20, $50 million funds that are created every single day that don't focus on women. And so that part is a little bit frustrating to me. And the other side of it is that I've had women, and this definitely applies to the funding side, but then more broadly, who don't want to go apply for these women-only funds because they said, well, I don't want to just get funding because I'm a woman. And I don't want to, that's not the path that I want to take. And while I respect that and I appreciate that you want to do the path that makes the most sense for you, I feel like you might as well take advantage of all of the opportunities. And so I'll give you a slightly different example, but a similar concept, which is that happens a lot. I do a lot of speaking, right? So that happens a lot with speaking, especially at the beginning. It's like, that they want a woman on the panel. So they reach out to you. Most of them are not going to be as blunt to say, it's because you're a woman, I want you on here. Some actually will. Hey, we're looking to diversify. We need a woman. Can you be that person? And a lot of women take a lot of offense to that. And this is, somewhat of a controversial topic. But for me, I've always taken that as an opportunity. So you may have only put me on the stage. You may only be, talking to me from an investment perspective because I'm a woman. But I look at that as an opportunity and a challenge to say, well, I promise you, when we leave this conversation, when we leave this meeting, you're not going to think of me as a woman. You're going to think of me as intelligent, capable, ambitious, XYZ, whatever the goal is for that specific event. And then next time they're going to reach out to you, not because you're a woman, but because you are XYZ. And then you can use your network to influence and bring other women, because it's a trickle effect. Once you start it, you open that network to others. So the idea of the accelerators, 100% agree that accelerators and incubators are crucial in this aspect, because I talked about this a little bit, even in my experience. Entrepreneurial success is such a thin razor's edge of what that actually looks like. It could be timing, it could be network, it could be a myriad of things. So the more that we can do to help equip women to be successful, it just seems like a no-brainer to me. It's the same way, if you want to use a different analogy, let's go to education. SAT scores. So every evidence shows you take SAT prep courses, and this also then goes from a wealth thing. People who are richer tend to have special tutors, and they can take all these courses. They always score higher on the SATs because they've done the prep work. So it's the same way of using that as an advantage for us, where if we give them the right tools, we help them tell that story, because sometimes you're so close to the problem and you're so passionate about it, you can't see the way that it's being presented, and it's just shifting. It's still you're still the foundation of the house, but we're just going to help put a new paint of coat on the outside, and all of a sudden it's desirable. So I cannot undervalue the importance of accelerators and incubators to really help women and anyone, people of color, men too, like get to the next level. Accelerators are so crucial.
I agree on the fact that women have to seize that space that is slowly opening to them, and get into it not out of, oh, I'm not going to go there because it's chosen as a woman, but actually, no, there is a space that is opening for me. I should take it, and I should, as you said, like prove who I am, and actually open it to other women. And it's exactly what we're doing with Mayshad. We're aligned with your philosophy. And I see women, micro entrepreneurs in Africa, and small entrepreneurs here, solo entrepreneurs, big entrepreneurs, put so much time and passion into their projects. And so it's just this generation of women who will dedicate their whole life to their entrepreneurial projects, and they deserve to be well directed, so that it's not just spending a lot of energy for not having consequent results, but just to shape it properly for them to be able to go to the next level.
Yeah, and I think that you made me remember another point on that same topic of the accelerators and incubators, which is, we talk about all the different things that can impact success. The other big aspect of that is network, and men tend to be more of the networkers and have that stronger network. So things like accelerators, incubators, groups, whatever we're talking about, expanding that network for women is huge, because you never know let's say that you have this idea, you're passionate about, and this is what you're going for, and you're part of this accelerator. You meet other women, you meet other men, you meet other people, mentors, you name it. Like, the amount of people that you can meet during that period of time is certainly, it's accelerated in a really exciting way. So maybe that's this first company you're doing is not the big one, but you now have this extra network that when you go to the next one, they can be there for you. So I think that's one of the most crucial aspects, outside of the feedback and everything else you get, is really that network. Because, I mentioned to you, I came from Colorado, I moved to New York, I didn't know a single person. And I realized, back, it's like the age saying, it's like, it's not what you know, it's who you know. I was so ambitious. I graduated top of the class. I'm going to take over the world. And then the world didn't give me what I wanted. And I'm like, well, what am I doing wrong? And then I realized how important networking is, which I think is just a quick tie-in to the world we're living now, which is virtual. Here is a huge opportunity for everyone. I did get the opportunity to move to New York, so there was that person-to-person thing. But when I was first building out my social media presence, I primarily did that through Twitter with people I did not know, and reached out and got proactive. And the reason my network is so powerful now is because I got really uncomfortable with being uncomfortable, and started reaching out to people blindly on Twitter, but with a specific ask or a specific purpose, and not always an ask, but hey, I think this part of what you do is great, or you mentioned this about lending, I think that's not true at all, and here's why. And so now more than ever, because we're forced into this digital world, this is a huge opportunity for women, especially, to kind of take back a bigger piece of that pie when we're all doing things virtually. Because it doesn't matter whether you're in Africa or whether you're in Columbus, Ohio, we're all, on this virtual path together.
Yeah, Scarlett, I think it's really interesting what you're saying too about the diversity and being comfortable with the uncomfortable. And now in this moment in time when we're all remote working, it's surprising who picks up the phone. And so I think it's, part of it is stepping into your power, and no matter what space you're in, because we know that, for example, that women often have a hard time negotiating raises, or they expect or think that they're going to be valued for the work that they're doing by being seen, as opposed to using their voice to ask for really what they want, right? And so I think that this is a perfect moment in time for women to really evaluate like how they think about their networks too. And that's what we're trying to do at Mayshad Choice as well, is to create ongoing opportunities for women to be able to engage, no matter what industry or job function or personal or professional experience you've had, but to create that ecosystem of togetherness, to really think through. And to your point earlier about including men, we have to include men to be a part of the solution as well, for sure.
No, absolutely. And I think it's very uncomfortable. It's like I can advocate for my brother, my husband, my dog, you name it. When it comes from myself, it's a little bit harder. But virtually, it actually takes a level of that off. I mean, no one wants to deal with rejection. That's not fun as human beings. We don't like that. But the virtual component makes it a little bit easier because you spend all this time thinking, and like I said, it's not like I would spray and pray. I mean, I was very strategic about building that network out when it was smaller, and then as it got bigger, it was easier. But I would say, let's say 5 messages a day, and I would spend an hour, very, very specifically articulating what the value and what I wanted from that person. And 80%, 90% of people never responded. And so I could sit here and be like, oh, wow, I'm terrible. I suck. I must not be important enough. But that one person who did every 3 days was a very high value person. And that expanded my network too. So it gives us a little bit of a pass because the sting is a little bit not as hard when you're doing it virtually than when it's to your face. Like, get out of my way.
I want to go back to one other point that we briefly touched upon earlier around the new world, right? So we're in this all together right now, and together we'll create something that becomes the new normal, because we all know that we're not returning to what was in the past, at least for a very long time. And so, many of us are thinking through, like, how can we do things smarter, easier, more efficiently, quicker? And that touches every industry, right? Because we think about like how we consume, how we shop, how we invest, how we save. That's all going to be and continue to be mass transformed. Wondering, how does that impact the fintech space and in your industry, but then also the different industries in which the fintech service serves itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to a little bit of what we talked about earlier, which is really around digital going from a nice to have to a must have, where, banking was one of those industries where there was still a healthy segment of the population who was doing things in a very traditional way. In the United States, as an example, checks are still very prolific across what we do. Whereas in other countries that just doesn't exist, and people still have those individual close relationships with their community bank, with their banker or teller down the street, and this has pushed us to really focus on digital. And I think having worked at 3 different financial institutions, including as a chief innovation officer of a public bank, I did a lot of banging my head against the wall because to me it was so obvious that this behemoth, which is fintech, is coming for us and our ship is going to sink. But I was still having conversations over and over again, and there were so many detriments to forward momentum and there's a lot of reasons, right? I go back to psychology for a lot of this too. The same way we're kind of talking from a networking perspective, but now they're afraid because they don't understand it. So that's really hard. There's a fear with technology and automation in general, and it certainly applies to financial services with job security. So is my job and my team's job going to be relevant anymore? And then part of it is they just don't believe it and they haven't seen the ROI. And so I think now with this new world and with this new way of working and moving, that we will have to start acknowledging the importance and impact of digital. And it's not that we're going to bypass regulation. It's not we're going to bypass compliance. Of course, they're going to be part of the conversation and risk and all of those people. But how do we not make this a 3-year process? How do we make this a 9-month to maybe 18-month process? What can we do to really accelerate those paths and start working with fintechs? And, we also are dealing with a new version of fintechs. They're more sophisticated. They've gone through this. They've gone and worked with other banks, and so it's like they're typically more equipped and capable to be working with you. And so it's like, how do we fundamentally make sure that all of these banks say the same thing? We care, our focus is on the customer. It's about customer first. But then you look at the experience and it's anything but. And you look at the fact that most of the revenue was coming from overdraft fees. Well, you're not for the customer. You're making money when we go over our accounts. And so it's really going back to putting the customer at the center of everything we do. And when I go and get on my phone here, I'm not just comparing my bank experience with my other bank, because by the way, I have like 6 of them, but I'm comparing it with my experience on Amazon and everywhere else where I'm 1, 2, 3 click. And so I want to make sure that that's reflected in my banking experience as well. And so the financial service providers, and I think this is really, really true, especially for the smaller ones. The big ones, they have a lot of money. They have a lot of stuff that they can throw at it. But because they're so big, it takes time. I think really for those bottom 3,000 is that now is a time to differentiate yourself, use your agility, use the fact that you don't have all this cumbersome stuff that the big ones have to get ahead of the game and take advantage and really meet the customers where they are and have a truly digital experience. And that just doesn't mean a pretty new, front end with some nice colors. It's everything through that process that makes it smarter and better, where you're actually giving people things that they want and not just bombarding them with everything under the kitchen sink.
Scarlett, and one quick follow-up question related to this, then how does inclusion fit into this as well? And will we need as an ecosystem to take a harder look at how credit scores are determined and who qualifies for what? And as we think about how could fintech and how could the advances you're talking about be actually used to level the playing field a bit more, are there opportunities for growth in that regard? Because I would imagine that, if we're moving more toward a cashless society, that's going to impact a significant portion of the population who may not want to be cashless, but right now have to be cashless or use cash is what I'm saying, I guess.
Yeah, so you're 100% right there. And that is an ongoing conversation. So I'll start with the high level of inclusion first. 100% fintech has tremendous amount of opportunities and impact around financial inclusion. So you talked about things like credit scores. There are no shortage of fintech companies who are looking at that model, because it's just been proven that credit scores are not a good representation of someone's ability to pay back a loan. Or or a credit card, which is obviously its loan in its own way. So there are things like that, and everyone is finding different ways. It goes back to big data, which is kind of how we started this conversation, but people are using things like your social profiles. I've spent a lot of time with some companies in Latin America. There's one in particular, Destacame, out of Colombia, who was using your utility bill. So this is, let's move away from the credit score, because in these countries they don't even have credit scores in many times. So the more disadvantaged and poor people were not getting access to even bank accounts, let alone mortgages or whatever else. What they started realizing is there are data points that they have and things that they continuously pay, their phone bills, their electricity bills. So they're using components like that. And by the way, in these cases, the government and other people need to get involved so that you can get more direct access, assuming the consumer gives you permission to do so, to say, hey, actually, while I don't have any bank account to associate with this, I do have all these other data points that show that I am, worthy, and I am paying things on a consistent basis, which I think is really, really important and crucial. So there's data, and the amount of data and how we utilize that is certainly a big indicator. A lot of people use social platforms. I've seen some of the models. I think there's more that needs to be done there. I don't know how much I believe in the social aspect and how active you are yet. I think there's still a lot to be determined. But in places too, like Africa, the idea of financial inclusion, where the idea of like group loans is very common, where there's a collective group of people, farmers, whatever else, or small businesses, jewelry crafters, who put their money together in a fund, and then they distribute that to the person who needs it at that time. That's worked really well, and that's been without technology. So there are certain applications that could be really, really helpful there. And there have been models that have been tried to be replicated like that in the US. There haven't been any that are super standouts in terms of success, but yeah, I mean, financial inclusion is crucial. The point around cash gives me a bit of anxiety for sure, because that definitely, especially, let's speak now back to the US, is disproportionately amongst the poor communities that still use cash. So the lack of ability to do that is a problem. So we certainly need to address that. But it's how do we get them banked in a way that they don't feel like they're taking advantage of it. I was giving you the examples of a lot of banks historically using the overdraft fees as big revenue aspects. And even when I was in college, I hate to admit this, I was not super financially savvy, and I had $13 in my account. And when I went to the ATM and I saw that, I went to Taco Bell, I went somewhere else. Anyways, apparently I was already overdraft, and within $3, $5, $6 purchases, each one was $35 overdraft. And that was a lot of money. And so there's aspects of that just cannot happen anymore. And we as a collective group within the financial service industry really need to be advocates for those people and doing what we can to help alleviate those concerns. And a lot of that too has to do with global money transfers and money movement. So we got to look into that more as well. And there are certainly companies who are trying to go after that business, because they need to get money back to their families in different countries, and they realize that there are high fees, but they don't know anything else, and or that same company is the only thing that's prevalent back in their home country. So it's how do we get smarter about that, so that hard-earned money that they spend so much time on, the majority of it actually gets to where it needs to go.
Thank you, Scarlett. Let's go to questions from our audience. Neza, I think you have the first one.
So, Scarlett, the first question is, what do you think of cryptocurrency, and where does it stand in relationship with fintech?
Oh, that's a hard question. It's a hard question because crypto, there's still a lot that needs to be told about crypto. It's interesting that our last question was on financial inclusion, because I think there are certainly a lot of opportunities for crypto. There is the ability of more transparency. Let's go a little bit more broadly and talk blockchain as opposed to just crypto. The challenge has been to this date too, and I certainly am excited about the potential. So I would say you will know that I am pro crypto and pro blockchain, but with a few major caveats in that when it was starting to kind of get crazy in the last 18 months, the very wealthy took advantage of that and was selling off big portions. And again, the less educated, the poor individuals are the ones who suffered. So there still needs to be a lot to be worked out with that. But crypto, I'm definitely excited about the possibilities, but there are still some pretty serious kinks that need to get worked out. And there's some very bad things that crypto has been used for to this point. So you got to be careful about advocating pro or against it because of some of those aspects. But I certainly believe that has a huge potential for the future, and blockchain more broadly, and taking transparency and especially in the financial inclusion aspects and everything else. So you think about, let's say that you're a nonprofit, and with this big pandemic, let's say that we're all giving money to some food company. And we don't know, okay, we've given this money, we don't know what actually happens. We hear some high-level stats about, okay, well, we fed 250,000 people or whatever that number is. How do we know where the validity is there? Things like using blockchain can actually allow us to monitor that process and see that the funds are being allocated and used in the correct ways. So I'm certainly very excited about the long-term potential within fintech and financial services more broadly.
Scarlett, earlier in the conversation, we talked about the importance of including men in our conversations and in the solutions. For the men listening in our audience, and this one actually I think comes from one of our male advocates, how can men be champion for other men in insisting that women are a part of the solution?
I think it's being very intentional about what you do. So years ago, I wrote a piece for Forbes on men mentoring women, and really that was stemmed from my own personal experience of you've now learned that I have been ambitious for a long time, and I've had big ideas and big dreams. And so I was like, I want to get the most powerful, badass woman to like be that leader for me, and she's going to help me. And I tried, and I was reaching out back to the beginning, really uncomfortable, reaching out to all these women, and I did not hear back from many women, to be very honest with you. And I was so discouraged. And a few of them, because I had started building a bit of a network of men, they would even advocate for me to meet with these women. And women, they would sit with me for 10 minutes and be like, hey, I'm busy. What do you need? And I totally get that. But what I realized through it, and the point of this story was that I found so many incredible men allies who it didn't matter their gender. Each one of them, for me in this case, had something specific and unique. One of them was a serial entrepreneur. I could talk to them about that aspect. One of them was great at negotiating, so I would call them when I wanted to talk about that. But one of the interesting things about that article, and it's very outdated now, but I still have it pinned as my main tweet on Twitter because I still love it so much. And I still to this day, I think it was 6 years old now, but I still to this day get people, and men particularly, that say, thank you so much for this. I never thought about it. So like in this case, I had a call to action of, if you are a man in a leadership position and you have a team of men and women, definitely seek out those women to say, hey, can I take you to lunch to talk about your career? Because some women are not going to be comfortable enough to do that. You obviously have to be careful of the balance, hence why I said lunch and not drinks or anything else that could be totally cool for you to do with a guy, or breakfast or something, and really help just have that conversation and get clear about what they need, I think is a great way. So when you're talking to other men, it's just asking them to go out of their way for the women in their lives, and give them that extra time and just say, hey, what does that look like for you? What are the next steps for you? What are the things that you're struggling with? How have you thought about X? Because what I found is there's so much value that they have there, and they really want to help. They just don't know how. So it's taking that proactive approach and saying, here I am. What can I do to, help you? Let's have this conversation. And there are so many amazing male allies, and I wouldn't be where I am if it wasn't for them, to be honest with you.
I just would like to add a point. It's, we all also have a lot of, we call them the Mayshad friends, which are all those male advocates that support us, that support the mission. And, the best leaders that we encounter don't have this gender problem because they're true leaders, and so they will really see a human with capacities when they're building a team, or so they don't have those unconscious bias, and I think it should be part of a true leadership skill to be able to empower everyone equally, and actually the same way you would go and try to empower introverts with reaching out to them more than extroverts that will come to you. Also seeing that some women are not the type to reach out, to go and reach out to them, but definitely embedded in a true leadership skill.
I totally agree. The last thing that I would say, which goes back to psychology, is we're human beings, right? And so it's very easy for us to, back to even what I was looking for. I had this vision of this woman that would take me to where I needed to go and be all these things for me, when in reality that could have easily been a man. It didn't have to be a woman. So on the opposite side, when you are a man in a leadership position, just whether you realize it or not, you're looking at your team, and if there's a guy that reminds you of aspects of yourself or a younger you, you're naturally going to gravitate towards that person. So it's being aware of that and saying, okay, how do I make sure that I'm not just connecting with people that remind me of my son or myself at an age? And it's like really about how do I help bring those people up? So I think it's just being hyper aware of that, because we all have tendencies to do that. I find that even in myself, and it's like, okay, stop it, Scarlett. Think about it differently. Think about whatever you can, because we all want to feel connected, and there's an easy way, because a lot of it too is when people start getting promoted, and I will tell you, for most of the jobs that I've had, I haven't met the job requirements because I was hired based off of potential and whatever else, right, versus that experience alone. And so when you're looking at, and even when you're looking at your next candidate, it's not just about what it says on the paper, but it's about, do they meet these cultural aspects of what I'm looking for? Do they have the hustle? Do they have the scrappiness? Whatever it is that defines success within your organization, it's looking for those aspects and not focusing so much on the experience and how they present it in their resume, because as we said before, women are not as good typically, and this is a generalization because there are exceptions, at advocating for themselves. So it's for you to kind of take the pieces and like make your, it's like you have this beautiful cake, and this cake looks more beautiful than this one, but then after you take all the ingredients out, you put it together and you actually see the one that was less pretty then is better here. So I really think it's being conscious about doing those type of things.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Scarlett. These are excellent words of advice, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and insights with us. This is Mayshad Choice, Women in the City. Thank you, Neza, so much for doing what you do each and every day to support women around the world. And please, everyone, visit us at joinmayshad.com. And make sure to also check out our new digital membership packages that we just launched. We have incredible ways for all of us to stay actively engaged with each other and connected and to be a part of the solution as we move forward. I'm Jen Mercer-Doms, the Vice President of U.S. Development with Mayshad Choice. Thank you, everyone, and see you again soon. Thank you, Scarlett. Thank you, Neza.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here.